Night Vision. Following clues left by our ancestors, we unbury the past to reveal a knowledge of unfathomable value, putting us just a little closer to our own true birthrights. From the secret history of a possible bloodline of Jesus Christ, to secret history of America's founders, to the secret history of extraterrestrial interaction on our planet, here to bring light to the night. Your host for Night Vision Radio, Renee Barnett.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us tonight. I'm so glad that you could be here on your Friday evening. Really appreciate your participation and your viewing and your listening. Tonight we've got a really special show. I don't believe I've ever done a show on this subject, but tonight we're going to be talking about pirates. Pirates, have sort of captured the imagination of the entire world with their adventures on the high seas, and they sort of represent that, rebellion and freedom that we sort of secretly long for. But there's some other things about pirates that, I never really thought about, and that's why we're going to do the show tonight. It's been brought to my attention that the pirate society was basically the sort of first, socialist democracy or democratic socialism on the planet. And in some ways, they could have contributed, or that style could have contributed even to the founders in the way they set up America. But we're going to have a real pirate buff on with us tonight, and he's going to talk about how the society was set up and exactly how pirates really operated. And I've already learned a lot just from preparing for this show, so I'm really anxious to hear what our guest has to say. And he is Sean Halsall, and he's coming to us tonight from the UK, and very kindly agreed to get up at 3 a.m. and do the show. Welcome, Sean.
Thank you, Renee. It's nice to be back again.
Oh, so good to have you back. Sean's a recurring guest, and we've had him on a couple times already, and hope to that he'll keep coming back. But tonight, this show, the show idea, I have to credit Sean for. I never really thought about doing anything on pirates, but once we got talking, it seemed really interesting. And with Sean's background in politics and trade unionism, it kind of all really fits together what Sean's going to talk about tonight. But, Sean, we always hear about, Blackbeard and Captain Kidd and so many of these big name pirates that have just been sort of, legendary and romanticized in films and everything. And I wonder how much we really know about their lives.
Absolutely. And I think it's sort of the myth around piracy is somewhat of their own making at the time. It suited them to be feared and to have that sort of reputation, because if you're feared, you're much more likely to hand over your ships and any sort of cargo you're carrying.
Hand over the booty.
Absolutely. So it's without much of a fight. So it suited them at the time to have this sort of legend around them, and that's sort of perpetuated through time. But I think it's a little bit more complex and interesting what was actually going on. Like, as you said in the beginning, pirates really did put the sea in democracy. They were some of the first instances of working class pure democracy and representation, and there wasn't really anywhere else in the modern sort of era where working people were able to elect their leaders and had a fair share of the spoils of their labour. So it's very interesting, yeah, like you said.
Was there a hierarchy at all, though? I mean, you hear about these big guys like, Captain Kidd and Blackbeard, who seemed to be the boss man. Was there always someone that sort of at the helm, so to say, and then but everyone still had a say, or how did it go?
We obviously had the captains, which tend to be the most well-known people from that time, but they were elected and could be removed by majority vote at the same time.
Oh,
so any sort of brutal or cowardly captains were quickly voted out of position. The captains also only really had control during battle. It was a pirate council which controlled most of the rest of the decisions going on, and that was the full crew on the ship.
Mm.
They also elected a quartermaster as sort of a check against the captain as their representative there. So we had the captains, the quartermasters, and then the pirate council sort of making up the three executives, if you will, which obviously we see reflected in the way the foundations of American democracy came about. And there's a lot of other sort of things reflected from how they organized themselves there.
I mean, they really were outlaws, though, right? And they did, piracy by its very definition, means an outlaw. But but with the way that they set up their sort of society, that, like you're explaining, I wonder if that's where the old saying "honor among thieves" might have begun. I'll have to look up the origins of that saying, but it seems like they had their own code of honor.
Yeah, there is literally the pirate codes, which where that comes from. So before they formed a crew and a ship and elected the captains and quartermasters, they would draw up an agreement deciding on the discipline on the ship, how that was going to work, the division, how they divide up the stolen goods and compensation for injured pirates, and how they would divide the spoils of what they would get. So there was a formal agreement before they went on that everyone voted on going on. So democratically, again, how they were going to divide the spoils. Sometimes captains got more than one share because of the responsibility, and quartermasters. But it was all it very rarely was more than sort of double what anyone else was getting. So it's much more fairly distributed than we'd see now. And interestingly, you'd argue people like Francis Drake and other famous sort of adventurers early on were also pirates. Many of them did exactly the same things. They just had permission from their country's sovereign
government. That's wild. Well, so every person that was on the ship did have a voice, is what I'm hearing you say, from the lowliest worker to the captain. And absolutely. I read that sort of a dichotomy, in that I've heard that there were many women pirates, but then I've heard that women were not generally on pirate ships. How unusual was it for it to be mixed?
I think it's probably not as common as a lot of the time, but certainly for the time, we've got records of female captains like Anne Bonny around, an Irish pirate captain woman. That certainly there must have been quite a few women for people to have rose up and us to still know their names now. It must have been more.
She was born in Ireland, but didn't she move to the New World, to America? And didn't she start off her piracy from there? Or do I have the wrong end of that?
I think so, yeah. I'm not an expert on Anne Bonny, but I believe she did come off from the eastern seaboard.
Yeah, she was. She grew up in the Carolinas. Actually, Carolina at that time was a British colony. So she came from Ireland over to Carolina, and I think she was like in the 1800s, so she was a little bit later than, I mean, sort of the pirate heyday was a little bit earlier than that, although they're still pirates.
She was active in the early 1700s. I think she disappeared in 1721.
Oh, that's right, 18th century. That's absolutely right. Yeah.
So that's right in the golden age of piracy there.
Yes.
Right, smack bang.
Yeah, it is. I think I have a picture of, or a rendering of her.
Excellent.
Kind of an odd picture, but there she is. And then she married a pirate named Bonnie, but then she left him, and she ended up getting involved with Calico Jack. What was I saying? Rackham?
Yeah, Jack Rackham.
Jack Rackham. And he was known for being like a real snazzy dresser and a real, swashbuckler. And that's a rendering of Calico Jack Rackham, who became involved with Anne Bonny, and they stayed together and pirated together. And it was quite a scandal because she was married still. And I guess it was quite a deal, for her to run off with Calico Jack. But, and then there was a couple more that, I think Mary Read was another one who was also known to always dress like a man and, be very commanding. But, other than that, as far as well-known women pirates, unless you want to go back to China, there was one woman pirate that commanded over 80,000 sailors, and that was long, long ago. But you don't hear too much. I mean, I have a feeling, as in everything else in history, there were probably more people, more women involved, and they just didn't make the history books, and that's the same with a lot of people that were just considered kind of insignificant. When you're looking back at history, you see portrait sketches, of famous people, of well-known people. You don't find very much info on, the guy that's making shoes down the street, So,
yeah, I think that's it as well, isn't it? We look back at history from this sort of era, and the instances of working class people recorded is very, very few, except for this sort of world where almost everyone's from a working class background. I mean, as well, it's interesting to look at and think of it in the context of the day. We think of it as just seafaring now and ships and it being a bit old timey. At that time, these ships were the absolute pinnacle of technological advancement.
State of the art. Yeah.
It's like the Silicon Valley workers of the world. It's how everyone communicates at the time. It's how people transport the goods. It's absolutely the cutting edge in most fields. And these people working on these ships would have access to information quicker than most of the world, access to the world's knowledge. You'd have a very keen understanding of what's going on around the world. So I think, as they're going to be the most politically aware and knowledgeable sort of people, especially from the working classes.
Is that because they travel?
Absolutely. It's traveling and the crews
other countries, other cultures, Yeah.
The crews are often made up of people from different countries and cultures. So you very quickly lose that sort of bond with your own nation and realize we're all people.
Yeah.
And that sort of veil of having sort of like, what's the word? Sort of like, pride in your nation and being patriotic disappears over looking after your brother who's looking after you at work, or someone who's there day in, day out, making sure you stay alive on them ships, because they're extremely dangerous places. So you're relying on each other to keep yourself alive. I know
that, there were actually people who were born into piracy, born into pirate families and things like that. But and I know that women who became pirates, I think it was generally that there just wasn't work for women. So, but if you're not from a pirate family, I mean, what made them decide to become pirates? Was it the same for men? Work was scarce. Did they just want adventure and freedom? What was the whole idea behind joining a pirate group?
Especially at the time, well, work was obviously scarce. For these people, they're, again, extremely skilled for the time periods in what they do. It's sort of the cutting edge of technology. But, I mean, for the average merchant navy ship or naval vessel sailing out of Britain, you'd have 18 to 20 people as crew in the ship. A ship of the same size with pirates would have about 80. So the workload's 25% of what you'd expect in any other line. So it's sort of the original short working week.
Yeah.
As well as
labor
and again, it's that freedom. It's the ability to influence through democracy on there. Working people haven't really had that. So for the first time since feudalism started, certainly, we've got working people being able to have a say in the direction of their own lives, and that's very powerful. Being able to have that sort of agency over what you're going to do with your life and where you're going to go, and potential to actually become very wealthy.
Yeah, especially in those days. But the idea of just setting off, it just sounds, scary, but also very exciting, I would think, for some, especially for, young people, young men, especially looking for, their own chance at life. But what was their, how did they, and I know this is really not the focus of what we're talking about, but how did they in their minds deal with the fact that they were robbing from people? Did they have a code about that? Did they rob from the rich? Did they did they have a moral code as far as the outside world went? It seems like they had one for inside.
Yeah, again, we look at the context of the time. It's most other working class people haven't got access to ships. These ships are owned by elite companies and stuff that end up becoming things like the East India Company and various nations. So it's most of the ships are owned by nation states, and they're transporting gold from Spain, but from the Latin America to Spain, things like that.
They're not robbing little old ladies on their little canoes or anything.
Absolutely not.
That's good. Well, you saying that, there where other ships would have, 18 people or whatever, and they'd have 80 on the pirate ship. What did that mean for space and privacy? And I would think that, that would impinge on that a little bit, but that also might be one of the reasons that they had the rules and the code and, had to be able to accommodate each other.
Yeah. Interestingly, that looking for space all the time ended up on the pirates disrupting the Atlantic slave trade quite often, not through any sort of moral standpoint, although we will come on to African pirates and stuff. But the slaver ships had a lot more space on them, so that space was in a very useful for ships when you've got bigger crews. But yeah, interestingly, I think I've read somewhere between 30 and 50% of most crews on pirate ships were of African origin. So not only did we have a very diverse crew in sort of European terms, but also, again, the first time we've got Black African pirates. They're also getting involved in the democracy and yeah, having the same sort of say. So it's well ahead of its time. And then see that moved on to land in Nassau, where we had 11 years of sort of a pirate republic coming about, which we can get onto again shortly.
Oh yeah, I'm not aware of that at all, so I want to hear about it.
So the island of, well, the city of Nassau on New Providence Island was a British colony, and the pirates completely took it over in 1706, threw out the British government, and in 1718 is when it all came falling in. But they sort of replicated the codes they had, the articles of agreement on the ships, and used that to sort of found a government that worked. Pirates, Benjamin Hornigold, you may have heard of, who was sort of involved around then, but many of the sort of big name pirates, Blackbeard, Edward Teach, his real name, and Sam Bellamy, Stede Bonnet, and Charles Vane, and Calico Jack as well, who we spoke about earlier. They were all around this time in Nassau. So it's sort of a real magnet to all the who's who of piracy.
Nassau.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's interesting. Why that location?
The Caribbean's obviously where most of the spoils were going. We had Spanish treasure galleons coming back from Latin America still. The British with the various colonies around the Caribbean and eastern seaboard of the United States before it was the United States. So there's a lot of trade going on and a lot of opportunity to sort of engage in piracy.
Hmm. When you're teaching your classes, your union classes, do you ever talk about the Pirate Society? And
I brush on any sort of historical parts of socialism in action when I can, because I think it's important that we recognise what's come before us and the people who've come before us and what's possible. Because often we get stuck into thinking that the only way we do things is how we're doing things now. Mm-hmm. When it's a relatively modern phenomena of neoliberalism and this sort of free market, laissez-faire economics. And there was a time when working people did have democracy and did have a say. And if we weren't given it, then we took it in the past. And I think that's important to remember that this is always an option.
Yeah. Like in France right now.
Absolutely.
Man, that's wild over there. I'll be over there soon. I wonder if they'll still be talking about it. Maybe they'll get it resolved by then. But I'm, of course, on the side of the people, the workers. But, it's funny because, in talking in certain circles, when you say democratic socialism or a socialist democracy or however you want to put it, certainly in the United States, socialism is a dirty word. They see it as, Soviet Union, the old, communist ruled, dictators and everything, when really it's kind of the exact opposite, isn't it? Of a dictatorship or an authoritarian. It is the exact opposite. And what I think people don't understand is that we already have socialism here in the United States in many forms, with our police departments, our social security system, and a lot of different things like that. Our schools are socialist. They're free for everyone. And so I'm not sure exactly. I think it was probably in the 50s or with the McCarthy era, where it got all tied into this, communist scare that was going on at the time. But in other, like, for instance, in the UK, of course, I know that there's an opposition, a right wing, opposition, but generally, when you say socialism in England, how do people hear it?
It's probably not quite as bad as in the United States, but it's certainly getting there. You do get some of the same visceral reactions, despite the fact that we've got a free healthcare to thank for a socialist government after the war. We've got the council housing and all that sort of stuff in the welfare state. I think it's interesting though that the capitalists don't mind when it's socialism for them, like we saw in 2008 with the banks getting bailed out to the tune of billions, trillions.
Right.
It's fine to have socialism for the capitalist class and protect capital at all costs, but when working people want to be looked after with free healthcare, which it's absolutely wild to me that you still haven't got that in the United States, that working people still can be pushed into massive amounts of debt through no fault of their own, through getting often horrific diseases and illnesses. And again, it's working people who are going to be more susceptible to these diseases just because deprivation's the biggest cause of illness and disease.
And also they're, doing more labor. They're working with machinery. They're, putting themselves in, dangerous positions, being up on a tall building, and things like that. So they're more likely, they've got a higher percentage chance of getting into a work-related accident or any kind of accident.
Absolutely. And it's your lifespan shortened anyway through you're going to be living in areas and working in areas with poorer air quality. You're going to have worse diets because you haven't got the access to the same sort of nutrition that someone with money would. So that's not just the short term big impact things, but also the longer term things that will lead to a much worse time sort of as you age. You're going to have much worse ailments as you grow older, and then that again, if you haven't got free healthcare set up, that can absolutely cripple you financially.
It sure can. I've seen it happen to people, and we hear about it all the time. It's just devastating. But what I don't understand, because it is the working class who would benefit the most at the end of the day with some of these social services, free health care and such, but they've been poisoned about it somehow to think that it's bad. I mean, I just don't understand it. But anyway, we should learn from the pirates.
Yeah, and the pirates. There was a famous pirate motto which went, "A merry life and a short one." So the pirates were under no illusion that they were stepping into something that they were going to retire and live a life of luxury. It was about having that freedom while they could get it and living extravagantly and well while they could get it. But many, many pirates end up on the gallows. And I've been looking for a good quote for you, but I cannot find one. But many, many of these pirates on the gallows use their final speeches as sort of theatre to have an anti-capitalist rant and talk about the merchants abusing the sailors of the day and pointing at these traders at the gallows. And they were sort of seen as like Robin Hood sort of figures. They were lauded, and people would turn up in their droves and call for mercy for these men and women often. And yeah, I think it's interesting to see even then that these were sort of the rebellious nature of pirates and what the monarch and crown and laws of Europe and the Americas were trying to do to them didn't quite ever cut through and work. These people were seen as heroes in their time.
Yeah. I can imagine how that would be too. I mean, they were probably seen as people leading a very exciting and free existence. Yeah, Anne Bonny and Calico Jack were to go to the gallows. And then she said, and I don't know if it was true or not, but she said she was pregnant. And so they delayed both of their executions, but then they went ahead and executed Jack. But there's really not much known about what happened to her, whether she was executed. It seems like some people believe that she managed to get away somehow and then just lived the rest of her life in obscurity. But I don't know. That'd be interesting to know what happened to her.
Yeah, it's surrounded in mystery, and at least on my part, we can only hope that she did get away and manage to live out her days. And
yeah, wouldn't that be great?
absolutely.
So, what else can you tell us about, the way that they had things set up, and how that sort of seemed to sort of flow out from them into other societies and other cultures, and that stories. I mean, how did people even know what they were doing or how their culture was on the ships?
Pirates and normal sort of civilians would interact quite often. They weren't feared in every sort of port they came into. So you speak to other mariners and seafarers and sort of exchange conversations. Also, when pirates would seize a ship, they would line up often the crew on one side of the ship and the captain on the other of these merchant vessels and naval vessels. And they would ask the crew how your captain treats you, make sure, does he feed you properly? Does he over discipline you? And if that crew reported that the captain was cruel or particularly bad, greedy, they would then execute the captain of the ship. If he didn't, if he treated his crew well, he would be given a little bit of gold and the means to get back to London and told to go back to London, spread the message, what happened here. If you treat your crew well, you won't be executed. You won't be looked on unfavorably.
Wow.
So them sort of tales obviously spread very quickly, and it's great sort of propaganda to have that going around, that you look after your crew and we're not going to do wrong to you.
Right. Now, when they would seize a ship, would they actually take the ship and then use it themselves?
Yeah, they built up fleets through taking prizes. They'd either take the ship if it was useful to them, or raid it, take anything useful off that ship onto their own, and sort of scupper the ship and sink it at sea if the ship was no use to them.
Did you ever have like sort of warring pirates where one group of pirates would attack another group and steal what they had already stolen?
Yeah, often people had marks of the crown, so marks of this, whichever crown it was. So they'd be operating under, working for a government of one sort or another. So they'd have a letter of marque to, say, you're British, we're at war with Spain, to attack Spanish ships, but engage in piracy the rest of the time. And often when these sort of wars ended, these pirates forgot that these marks, the wars ended, and carried on raiding, pretending they were doing it in the name of the crown.
Wow. That's really interesting. So what got you into studying about pirates, and what sparked your interest?
I've always been fascinated by rebels of any sort of ilk, and especially working class rebels. And it's sort of that idea of the golden age of piracy and what they achieved in Nassau and all that, and the democracy on the ships, which I obviously learned about before coming into it, because I came into this with the same sort of ideas as anyone else, that it's a sort of Pirates of the Caribbean way of looking at piracy, rather than what is the much more fascinating, true democratic sort of pirate ships and working class people taking a stand and having a say in their own lives for the first time ever. I've always been drawn to working class history, and I think this is, as well as being the golden age of piracy for many people, Europeans and Africans at the time, this was the golden age of working class history as well as piracy.
Wow. So the golden age of piracy was like 1,000 years, wasn't it? Or I mean, 100 years. Sorry.
It's between
Like 16, the
yes,
1650s to 1730s or something like that.
Yeah, 1690 roughly to 1730 around then. So 40 years, very short time span, really, in the grand scheme of things. But
and why did that end? I mean, why was that the golden age, and what happened that it ended?
Well, we see the rise in sort of empire and the colonial powers of Europe sort of deciding that they need to take a stand on this and send in big naval fleets.
I wondered about that, if they ever were pursued by, navies from different places. So basically, it just kind of died out. But there are still pirates, right?
Yeah. I mean, for as long as we've been sailing on the sea, there've been acts of piracy. I'm sure James would be a much better sort of guess on this, but the Knights Templars had problems with pirates in the Mediterranean with the sort of Barber states.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, Julius Caesar himself was captured by pirates famously in Rome. So yeah, as long as we've been on the sea, there've been people taking to the sea and wanting their own freedom and sort of using the sea to turn a living and stealing from other people.
Now, do you have any sense that, the pirates that exist today still sort of follow the pirates code, or
I wouldn't imagine so.
The golden age.
Yeah, I wouldn't imagine so. It seems a very, very different sort of piracy to what was going on then. But I'm no expert
today or something, but maybe that's just because the pirates of old have been so romanticized. Maybe it was pretty brutal then too.
Yeah, I think it most certainly was brutal, but I think the way they'd organized themselves, I think any sort of life at sea was brutal. I mean, they chose one where they would have a say in their own future. And again, back to that, if you're doing 25% of the work that someone on a naval ship is doing, you're going to have a much easier time, a much easier life, aren't you?
Yeah. So the people that were even the pirates off the East Coast of America, they would still end up around the Caribbean.
Absolutely, yeah. It wasn't uncommon for sort of pirates to float between Caribbean islands and then pop into Boston and up as far as the Newfoundland and stuff like that. It's that whole sort of seaboard.
And I would imagine, like you said, that they weren't necessarily known or wanted in every port. So I would imagine there were probably some places where they knew they could walk around freely among, the people there.
Absolutely. And obviously the eastern seaboard of the colonies at the time were probably a lot easier for them to get away with and a lot less sort of police than back in the United Kingdom.
Right.
So it was all very, very new over there. I mean, 1690 to 1715, it's still some way before the United States becomes a thing.
Yeah.
So it's a very different world. And I think as well, as I said, having these people wandering around those colonies, I can't see how they didn't inspire the foundation of your states over there. I mean, look at the Pirate Code in the 18th century, and we've got the right to vote. We've got checks and balances with having elected quartermasters and the Pirate Council and representative democracy and the spoil system. So division of all the goods equally. So that's got to be sort of some sort of embryo of the American democratic system now. It's interesting. I can't see, with the time period being so close and those people operating so close, and Nassau and the pirates.
It does make sense.
It's very interesting to look at. Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, certainly some of the very ideals that they, believed in practice ended up in our um, Constitution. So,
Absolutely, yeah. Again, yeah. It's
and
it's interesting.
where did the most pirates come from? Or was it just from everywhere?
I think most of the ones we know are from sort of the southwest coast of Britain, like naval sort of towns, because the British Navy was probably the biggest seafaring force at the time, along with French and Spanish.
Like, where would they have been setting off from?
All over. It depends where they could steal a ship from.
Oh, wow.
The mutinies on naval vessels, where the officers are thrown off and then ships are commandeered. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the pirates we hear. I mean, it's that accent you sort of hear that's famous in films for being piracy is a sort of West Country and right down the southwest around Bristol sort of accent, which is
Yeah.
city. So yeah, it's that sort of Plymouth, Bristol, Portsmouth around there.
Yeah.
Are also naval towns where people would have had them. So, because again, it's you can't just decide to be a pirate and you're suddenly an expert at seafaring. It's a very, very highly skilled job. You had to have some skill about you to perform these tasks that he required of you.
Yeah. Oh, and I always wondered, did they really walk the plank?
I'm not sure. I imagine so. I imagine that's how they dispose of those captains who were cruel to their crews.
Ugh. So they would just like drop them in the ocean, or did they tie them up so that they would sink? Or I wonder.
I imagine they would tie them up, first. And again, it's not to be cruel, but that would lead to a much quicker death, and probably you'd rather that than struggle and spend days at sea out in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean or on the Gulf of Mexico.
Yeah, I guess so. Do you have any any stories or any favorite stories about any of the pirates in particular? Have you followed any one more than the other?
I was always more interested in the structures and society they built, but I think Blackbeard's a very interesting character to look at, and the myths that sort of surround him. How far you believe them, I don't know. He was supposedly 6'9" tall and had a big black beard, obviously getting the name, but he would tie sort of sparklers, firecrackers in his beard when he was raiding. So he'd have his beard would be lit up and his face would be glowing like a demon, and
oh my god,
into that sort of theatre and creating fear through that. And apparently he was very kind to his own crew, and that sort of idea that he was this monster was just all fair. So that's
I always hear of how mean he was.
Yeah, I think that's again part of what they were trying to achieve in their time that has made them look bad since, but it obviously suited their cause to look like these demonic sort of murderous people, because you're much more likely to just hand over your ship without a fight if you think you're all going to be run through.
Absolutely. So is there something you wanted to touch on that we haven't touched on yet? Regarding the culture and now, are you familiar with ships that did have both men and women on them, and how did they handle that, or do you know?
Again, there's very, very little written about sort of how that operated. I think just the simple fact that we do know there were women on there, again, when there is so little recorded sort of history of working class people, is an absolute. It shows us that it must have been relatively common Because if we have women finding themselves as captains and in command of ships, then it can't have been, there can't have been a stigma around it. And it isn't like it's looked upon as an anomaly in the text we're reading, where you think it would be much more shocking for Anne Bonny or Mary Read, who actually both sailed with Calico Jack as well. They were both on her ship. So to find two women on one ship in sort of positions of command.
I didn't realize that they had done that. I didn't realize they knew each other.
Yeah. I mean, most of the characters we've spoke about, they all knew each other in one form or another. Yeah.
That's interesting. I wonder if they'd meet up and have pirate parties. And
I imagine many a pirate party happened on Nassau.
Meeting everybody meets in the pub and has a high old time.
That's that working class tradition.
Yep. So what do you think that we need to learn from pirates?
I think, especially working class people need to take from it that we've taken control of our lives before. We've rejected sort of the elite's idea for what they want for us and thrown off those chains and taken the life we wanted. And that's not something that we should take lightly. I think it's having control and agency over our own lives is something important, and we've got instances of this happening throughout history in different working class movements across the world. I think it's just the pirates did a very good job of marketing themselves in the time, so people very rarely think of them as working class, almost never think of them, the democracy that happened on these ships and the sort of splitting up and division of labour and wealth at the end. I mean, you could argue that the pirates were the first cooperatives, worker-owned cooperative establishments with all workers putting in the work and then taking out an equal portion. It was democratic socialism in well before Karl Marx or anyone like that was writing about these problems. These people, men and women, were living it.
Wow. And I would imagine that really fostered a camaraderie and almost like a family type feeling.
Yeah, I mean, if the world's governments all have you on a most wanted list and you're seen as an enemy and everyone fears you and you're at sea relying on the person next to you to keep you alive, then absolutely you're going to think of that person as more than a brother. You're going to be family, aren't you, on them ships and take care of each other's interest. And when it comes to fighting then against other naval vessels with the cannons blaring, then you might fight a little bit harder than those men and women, well, men on the other ships of the British Navy at the time.
Yeah, I can see why. So I don't know, how we can apply this to help our situations out in America and in the UK. I think we could both use some serious help.
I think it's taken agency, and especially in politics, which, as you mentioned earlier, I'm involved in myself in the UK. It's working class people often lack confidence to stand for positions of authority in local councils and state legislators over there, Parliament here, Senate, Congress. If working class people should fill these spaces, if we don't need other people to speak on our behalf, working class people are more than capable of representing ourselves. Some of the most well thought and intelligent people I've ever come across are people of our class. We shouldn't rely on aristocrats to sort of lead us. The pirates knew this in 1690, so how we've still not worked it out now, I don't know. But working class people can and should be speaking for us. And if we're going to have representative governments, then they should represent us and should reflect us, our situations. They should have had to have used healthcare systems and understand the importance of those systems. They should have had to have had experience with welfare and understand the hardships there, because otherwise we end up with people who who have myths around these things, and that perpetrates through their decision making. It's someone who's had to rely on welfare either in the United Kingdom or United States.
Yeah, there was I don't remember if it was a senator or a congressman just this last week. They had put forth a bill to stop providing school lunches for children here. And, of course, one side, which of course was probably the left, was saying, these kids, sometimes they don't eat except at school. This is their meal. And so they would provide them with a light little breakfast and then a lunch. And I think maybe a little healthy snack at the end of the day. And this one politician got up and said he didn't know any hungry kids, that there's no one hungry in the United States.
And that's it, isn't it? It's if you...
Oh, my God.
Yeah, if your sort of framing of life is being relatively well off and never having spoken to a working class person or someone who unfortunately has to rely on welfare through no fault of their own, then you're not going to see that as reality. Whereas if you've had to rely on them systems, you're going to make sure you protect those sort of systems.
Right.
And
or
food available.
If you had a brush with that, or even had a loved one, that needed some kind of, to take advantage of some kind of services or something, just so that you actually know it and understand it. I mean, in a way, you can't fault those guys for not knowing what they don't know. But that's why they shouldn't be representing everyone. They can represent the aristocrats and the rich people, but, let's get some regular Joes and Janes in there so that they know what's happening. I know, I was talking to someone last week about, they'd gotten in a tight squeeze and somebody, helped them out, and they're very appreciative. And I said, it's always the friends that don't have a lot that will actually come to your aid quickly because they get it. They just get it. It's not that, that they've got the extra money. It's that they understand and, they just act. Whereas a person that hasn't been through that might not even think to say, hey, are you okay? Do you need something? Can I help? So you can kind of always count on the guy that's been through a little bit. And
absolutely. And it's how we fix fingers. We sort of recognize that sort of class solidarity in looking after each other, but we don't translate that through to the bigger things because we're stuck in the struggle. We're all here trying to keep ourselves okay for the immediate future. And that takes our focus off the long-term sort of changes in society we need to bring about.
And I think that may be part of the reason it was set up this way is we're all busy working our tails off. We don't have time to look at the bigger picture, or many people don't. I mean, there are many people here in the United States that are working 2-3 jobs, just to make ends meet, just to have a roof over their families' heads. And they don't have time to, worry about the big picture. They're worried about putting a meal on the table tonight. And yes, there are hungry people here in the United States. There are hungry people everywhere. So, I don't know. I don't know what it takes for people to sort of open their eyes a little bit and say, oh.
The sad thing is, whilst we are in survival mode all the time, it becomes very difficult to do that. I don't think, especially, I don't think the democratic systems were designed this way. I think capital's captured them.
Yeah.
Through the media and big capital working in conjunction, it's sort of been captured the state, both in the UK and the USA. I mean, we see stuff with Trump and how he subverted democracy over there and the January 6th stuff.
I think he's the leading candidate in the Republican primary race so far.
Ironically, as well, back to piracy, those people, the Proud Boys and all them lunatics, would probably see themselves as the rebels and pirates while acting in the interest of sort of would have been the aristocrats of back then.
Yeah, exactly.
Of how they're framing themselves, but people still use this romanticized version of the rebel villain and don't look at the other side. I think if they looked into how piracy actually happened and worked in the democracy and seeing how democracy actually works rather than just using it as a pirated line,
yeah,
they may educate themselves politically and realize that.
A lot of those groups co-opt, cultural ideas and things like piracy, like Vikings. They're very much into Vikings and even the Knights Templar. It's like okay, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But
it's these very masculine on the surface warrior cultures, and they strip out what they think is useful,
right?
And ignore the other cultural stuff that is the much deeper and, for me, more interesting side of things.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. We've got just a few more seconds here to go.
That's flown by.
I can't believe it. Well, Sean, thank you so much for coming on with me. I wish James could have been with us, but we'll say hi, James.
Absolutely.
I'm sure he's not watching. If he was, he wouldn't have been able to resist coming on. I told him if he would just come on, we would put a piece of duct tape on his mouth and he could just sit and listen to us. I guess he didn't go for it.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Everyone.
Pleasure.
Thank you so much. Take care, everyone. Have a great week and a great weekend. Bye.